Hop and welcome to this gathering of the Climate Strong Islands Network. My name is Kyle Mandafat, and I cannot tell you how honored I am to be back. Not only that, but also how surprised I am to be back. Today, we come together across the seas, bridging the gaps, closing the distance, unified in our dedication to change and the preservation of our resources for our kids, our grandkids, and their kids and grandkids too. Let's get this gathering gathered. Ladies and gentlemen, here to officially welcome us, I present to you the president of the University of Guam, Dr. Thomas Christ.
Thank you to the Ocean Foundation and to the Global Island Partnership for co-hosting the Climate Strong Islands Network, together with the generous support from the New York Community Trust. Thank you for choosing one of our own, very own, to co-chair your steering committee, Dr. Austin Shelton, Director of the University of Guam Center for Island Sustainability and also of Sea Grant. And he is serving along with Brenda Torres, Executive Director of the San Juan Estuary Program in Puerto Rico. So we're in good hands. This pandemic really has shown us how important it is to protect ourselves. We must protect our bodies from disease. With supply shortages and shipping concerns, we have learned that we must protect our food security, our property, and our natural assets. The pandemic has also reaffirmed that we must protect our planet and our resources for future generations, and that we have work to do to get people around the world to work together more effectively to overcome big challenges. We in Guam are proud that our island is a founding member of the Climate Strong Islands Network. And in fact, since Guam is a day ahead of most of you, I had the privilege of being the first signer of the Climate Strong Islands Declaration, along with our Governor, Lourdes Leon Guerrero, and our Lieutenant Governor, Joshua Tenorio, on February 26th, 2020, just before the pandemic hit us all. This network is dedicated to addressing the concerns of climate change and sustainability in our island communities. This work depends on both intellect and partnership. The University of Guam aspires to be a leading institution in both research and partnership. And we are pleased to partner with all of you to foster a spirit of sustainability and to reduce the effects of climate change in our islands. Our efforts through the work of the UOG Center for Island Sustainability and also the Guam Green Growth Initiative and our other programs and partnerships have motivated and inspired people all around our island to step up and do what they can to help in this mission. We stand together with everyone here today who believes that while as individual islands we are firm and sturdy and rooted, together as a network we are really strong, island strong. Situt Masi, thank you, and Biba Climate Strong Islands and Alliance. Thank you.
But thank you so much, President Christ. Definitely feeling the power. And I'm sure that no matter where you're at in the world this morning, this evening, this afternoon, you're feeling just as empowered to continue along with the hard work that this group is putting forward. Today, we're celebrating that power, the power of the people who are unified in partnership. And to take us a little bit further into those partnerships, I'd like to welcome now from GLISPA and the Local 2030 Network, Mr. Jason Donofrio, Ms. Kate Brown.
I'll let Kate finish us off, and I'll just say a few remarks here. First of all, thank you everyone for gathering tonight. And what you're going to hear is the culmination of nearly 2 years of work and local stakeholder engagement to really identify, first of all, what are the real needs of island communities, not just based on a specific geography, but all U.S. islands. And what is being done right now in the halls of Congress, which then leads us to what you'll hear tonight, a set of recommendations and a framework in which we can improve legislation, both current and future. So I'm very grateful for your time tonight. I'm very grateful for the work that our steering committee, the policy subcommittee, and our partners and consultants at High Street Strategies have put in to the framework that you will hear tonight. And we hope that this will be a tool you can use, implement, and then please know that you can engage with the policy subcommittee on your recommendations and feedback from what you hear tonight. With that, I'll turn it over to Kate. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jason. It's such a pleasure to be here and to see this progress in this network, particularly of US Islands. And I wanted to reflect a little bit some other progress that the network has done, which is really joining another network, which is a partner. So it's one of the first partners of the Local 2030 Islands Network, which is a much more internationally oriented network focused on SDGs. And I think the leadership of US Islands in that network is key to that network functioning. We're really happy to see the connections between the two strengthening, and we look forward to seeing, with this new policy framework, which I think is, really unusual globally, we'll start to see some of these things changing in other countries that have a lot of islands who are often marginalized and not engaged in things. So I really see we're going to make a lot of progress together, both in this network and in other partner networks that we work with, and really would like to congratulate everyone that has contributed their thinking and their effort into what is a really great product. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jason and Kate, and a big shout out to everybody who is joining us here on this magnificent gathering. We do want to make some shout outs. We see some stuff popping up in the chat for sure. We've got Lirio from beautiful Puerto Rico. Wow. We've also got very exotic locations like Florida. Love Florida. Shout out to Elizabeth. She's coming to us from that beautiful part of the country as well. We've got more. Feel free to chime on in the chat box, and we'll get some recognition for your places through the rest of the gathering as well. As we've mentioned, as Kate has mentioned, as Jason has mentioned, the partnerships are really, 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 really strong, right? They're a big part of what's going to go into the work that's going to make the goals, the objectives happen. And the whole partnership is made up of different groups and sub-partnerships is what I'll call them throughout the world. Now, one of those teams keeping us moving, of course, is the Climate Strong Islands Network policy team. Here to introduce us to them, I'd like to welcome our CSIN network facilitator, Ms. Liz Okekivonben.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Kyle. And thank you to everyone who's joined us tonight. I know we've got about 45 participants on the line. And as Kyle said, coming to us from not only throughout the US, but around the globe. So thank you for giving of your time tonight. We are so excited to have High Street Strategies, which is our policy advisor, present the national policy framework that the Climate Strong Islands Network has been working on for the last year. It's been quite a labor of love for our policy subcommittee, in addition to our steering committee at large. And Matt, Aaron, and Nora have definitely led us through this process, and we are so excited for you to hear more tonight about the framework at large, but also the 7 key issue areas. Just because I think their backgrounds are extremely interesting and would love to brag on High Street a little bit tonight, I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction of Matt, Aaron, and Nora individually. So Matt Mullen is CEO and president of High Street and leads a team expert at navigating US federal and state legislative and policy measures related to budget and appropriations, grant funding procurement, tax policy, renewable energy, environment, telecommunications, ecosystem markets, and outdoor recreation. He has over 25 years of experience working in the environmental sector. He's lived on Smith Island and is based in Annapolis, Maryland. Aaron Gaines is an advocacy, government affairs, and policy consultant for High Street, and most recently worked as Senator Ron Wyden's Natural Resource Council, focused on public lands, oceans, forestry, outdoor recreation, and agriculture issues. She was also staff to the senator on the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, and she currently resides in Portland, Oregon. Finally, and last but not least, Nora Carlos is an associate at High Street and has nearly 10 years of environmental nonprofit education and strategic communications experience. She has great experience building partnerships with community leaders, as well as local and statewide organizations and agencies. Nora most recently worked for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation with experiences on Smith and Tangier Islands and resides in Richmond, Virginia. So while Matt, Aaron, and Nora present the framework, we would encourage you to populate the chat with any questions or comments that you may have on any of the information that they cover tonight. Time permitting, the team will address some of the questions post-presentation, and then the balance of the questions and comments will be addressed during the open comment period from 7 to 7:30. So we do hope that you certainly stick around for the hour. The presentation will be about 30 minutes. Again, we may entertain some questions at the end, but we certainly will entertain a larger discussion from 7 to 7:30. I will note too, at the close of the presentation, please know that Jason Donofrio and myself would love to meet with any of you one-on-one. So I will put up a link to a Calendly system where you can RSVP for a date and time in the future if you'd like to discuss this information further, or the network at large. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt and take it away.
Thanks, Liz. So last year, we at High Street Strategies were tasked with answering one question. How can US islands and territories become more climate resilient? So to answer that question, we held dozens and dozens of phone calls and Zoom calls over several months with members of island communities around the US to hear the various barriers that prevented those island communities from becoming resilient to climate change. We discussed a wide variety of issues and even some potential solutions. But one thing began to stand out. Each island community, no matter where they were, no matter how big or small, shared several key issues with all the other islands. Now formally known as the Climate Strong Islands Network, these islanders eventually identified several common key issue areas that prevented their communities from becoming climate resilient. Issues such as watershed planning, transitioning to clean energy, better preparing for disasters, waste management, developing a sustainable marine economy are some of those issues all islands communities face. So we've captured those issues and developed solutions in what we're presenting here tonight, the Climate Strong Island Network's National Policy Framework. We see the National Policy Framework as an outline to begin addressing islands' needs and a pathway to becoming more climate resilient. I did want to note and say thanks to all the members of the Network Steering Committee and Policy Subcommittee who took the time out of their really busy schedules to connect with us. As Liz mentioned, there were a lot of calls and a lot of Zoom calls and a lot of effort that went into this. So thank you to each and every one of you. So let's get into it. I'm going to turn it over to Nora on the High Street team, and she's going to give us an overview of the framework right now. Nora, you're up.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining tonight. So let's look at our framework. So the National Policy Framework has 3 parts: an introduction to US islands, recognition of the reoccurring cross-cutting themes, and 7 key issue areas with their corresponding recommendations. First, the framework introduces islands as unique, geographically diverse, and culturally distinct. From the various participants joining this call tonight, you'll notice that some US islands are governed by a state, while others are considered US territories. These varying levels of governance play a role in the ability of that island community in becoming climate resilient. One-size-fits-all federal policies haven't worked in the past for US islands. And as you all know, what works on the mainland does not always work on an island. So second, we have the cross-cutting themes. Underlying the importance of islands becoming climate resilient is the need for islands to also become economically resilient. We found that islands face challenges in meeting basic needs, including planning for the future, which are outlined in the cross-cutting themes. They include issues of representation, development of island capacity, and access to information and technology. Finally, the main focus of the National Policy Framework is to identify the challenges to becoming climate resilient, and then recommend policies that can be enacted to assist island communities in achieving climate resiliency. 7 key issue areas emerged from the data. Here they are. First is clean energy. Second is watershed planning. Third is food security. Fourth is disaster preparedness, followed by marine economy, waste management, and transportation. The National Policy Framework articulates these 7 issues and what can be done to address each of them, and outlines policy recommendations that can support island communities in becoming more climate resilient. Our intention is to share the National Policy Framework with decision makers and point to these 7 key issue areas and their policy recommendation as a place to start. The framework will help us advocate for islands as we point to specific areas where policies can be amended or enacted. So let's dive in to the details of the framework, starting with clean energy.
Thanks, Nora. The first key issue area addressed in the framework is clean energy. In general, the framework recognizes that US islands need government policies that support local, independent, reliable, and affordable energy generation, along with community-based distribution systems that are locally informed and responsive to local needs. Keeping in mind the unique challenges and needs of island communities, along with the current push to move toward clean energy and current government policies and priorities, we established a list of 7 overarching policy recommendations with 14 additional specific actions that can be taken to fulfill those recommendations. Because this list is long, I'll highlight just a few. First, federal government support for island communities in establishing and achieving clean energy or net zero goals. Developing effective federal funding mechanisms to incentivize and support clean energy deployment and energy storage solutions on islands. And establishing and funding a consortium to support the collaboration of federal agencies with local island governments, indigenous communities, stateside governments, NGOs, and local community stakeholders to develop and manage island-wide land use planning efforts, including the siting of clean energy projects. Next, I'll hand it over to Matt to talk about watershed planning.
Thanks, Erin. So the next issue is watershed planning. What we found from speaking with members of our island communities is that US islands need government policies that help them use and develop available land in ways that make them as prepared as possible to weather severe storms and sea level rise. Sustainable land use planning is critical for island communities when facing the increased likelihood of more severe storms and disasters. But oftentimes, island communities are tempted to prioritize short-term revenue generating projects over long-term key infrastructure investments. So the framework establishes 3 overarching policy recommendations with 12 additional specific actions that address this critical issue. A few of those things are like requiring meaningful island community participation, including indigenous communities, in all federal coastal and watershed related processes, agreements, and policy decisions that impact island communities. Provide incentives for island communities to prioritize lands conservation over development, including protecting lands like forests, wetlands, and farms through agricultural and conservation easement programs. Or provide federal funding and technical assistance for restoration efforts like riparian buffer plantings, focused on restoring entire watersheds instead of a patchwork approach focused on sections of streams. Together, actions like these and the others outlined in the framework can help island communities better manage their land and thereby become more climate resilient. So now back over to Nora for the next issue area.
Up next is food security. US islands import between 70 and 90% of their food at a high cost to residents. As the reliance on food grown on the mainland US has increased, locally grown food networks and distribution systems have decreased. Islands need support in transitioning their current food systems in order to diversify their food choices and sources. We also recognize that all food security issues will not be solved by growing food on islands, as some islands do not have the climate or available land needed to grow food. So transportation, storage, distribution, and refrigeration issues must also be addressed to achieve sustainable, healthy, and climate resilient food systems. We established 3 overarching policy recommendations with 17 additional specific actions that can be taken to fulfill those recommendations. Some examples include supporting the establishment of locally grown agriculture programs that consider local knowledge and expertise. Some ways that we can achieve that are by ensuring island community representation on USDA boards, commissions, and equivalents, and create an island farming and ranching committee to ensure specific island needs are being met by USDA. We can also provide access to US Department of Agriculture beginning farmers and ranchers loans for new farmers specifically situated in island communities. And finally, we can reevaluate US Food and Drug Administration grant programs and their requirements to ensure that island farmers are not being excluded. Now on to disaster preparedness with Erin.
The next key issue area is disaster preparedness. Overall, US islands need government policies that support a functional and prompt response to any natural disaster that recognizes the unique challenges islands face when responding to those disasters. As you all know more than anyone, the impacts of a changing climate and weather patterns have significant and sometimes devastating impact on island communities. Many factors can complicate and slow emergency response efforts. So to not only address how to prepare island communities to weather those storms, but to also ensure effective systems are in place to help island communities in the aftermath of disasters, we established 5 main policy recommendations. A sample of those include ensuring that funding mechanisms for disaster preparedness and response programs actually work for island communities, requiring federal agencies to implement best practices for disaster preparedness and response efforts to ensure that mistakes of the past are not repeated, and requiring that all building, rebuilding, redesign, or upgrading of structures and infrastructure must be done in a way that ensures they can withstand hurricanes and meet each island's climate resiliency goals, and to ensure that islands have the funding and support to meet those requirements. Next, Matt's going to talk about sustainable marine economy.
Thanks, Erin. So US islands need government policies that promote and protect their marine resources, their shoreside infrastructure, and sustainable thriving fisheries that all support island marine economies and combat climate change at the same time. Islands have unique assets: coral reefs, estuaries, mangroves, kelp forests, even the open ocean are all things island communities rely on for economic opportunities and subsistence fishing. So ensuring island communities have the resources and assistance necessary to support strong and sustainable marine economies is one of the policies recommended in our national policy framework. So what does that mean? It means focusing on infrastructure funding for building, upgrading, and maintaining resilient waterfronts that can withstand hurricanes and sea level rise and frequent flooding. Or it could mean establishing Sea Grant extension agents in all island communities. In partnership with local universities, these extension agents could provide additional capacity and expand technical assistance opportunities to support island initiatives related to the marine economy and coastal resiliency. A sustainable marine ecosystem can be, and often is, the major economic driver of an island community. Ensuring that marine ecosystem and the human infrastructure around it is vibrant and sustainable will be key to achieving a more climate resilient future for US islands and territories. Next to Nora for waste management.
So waste management. Solid waste management is a pressing issue in island communities. With finite available land, landfill options are sparse, leaving few options for island communities. Incineration is often posed as a solution, but leaves lasting impacts on air quality and human health. Long-term and sustainable waste management solutions are needed, including innovative solutions like transitioning islands to a circular economy that turns waste back into resources. There are 6 policy recommendations that address waste management, and they include bringing locally and culturally relevant program support to islands and provide technical assistance, capacity support, and funding to establish effective waste management systems, including trash, recycling, and large-scale composting programs. We can also support and fund the development of island solid waste models that strive for a circular economy approach and prioritizes and incentivizes reuse practices and reduces new production of solid waste. And we can provide innovative solutions for waste management that do not compromise air quality or lead to excess pollution like incinerators. Now, onto the 7th and final issue area, transportation.
So our last key issue area is transportation. The framework recognizes that US islands need government policies that support sustainable transportation options that reduce emissions and ensure safe and reliable movement of goods and people on islands and between islands and the mainland. We know that without adequate transportation, basic services are slowed or cut off. We also know that transportation policies can be complex, with multiple local, state, and federal agencies involved. So the 5 transportation policy recommendations reflect that complexity and the specific transportation needs of each island community. These recommendations include creating collaborative working groups with participants from the Department of Transportation, Federal Aviation Administration, Department of Commerce, and other relevant federal agencies with participation by island community representatives to address the transportation needs of island communities. Authorizing and appropriating funding for consistent and reliable ferry and plane service to remote islands, and developing effective funding mechanisms to incentivize and support the transition to energy efficient and electric vehicles and ferries on island communities, including programs that help island communities remove antiquated vessels and vehicles off the island. So I'll hand it off to Matt to talk about several cross-cutting themes.
Hey, Matt, you're on mute. Can you start us over with the cross-cutting themes?
Oh, yes. Sorry about that. 2 years into it, and I'm still muting myself. So those were the 7 key issue areas and some of their related policy recommendations. But a few other things emerged in our conversations with the islanders we spoke with last year, concepts that consistently stood out during every conversation we had. The cross-cutting themes of representation, local capacity development, and access to information and technology were consistent across the board, and they directly impact an island's ability to address climate resiliency. What we learned was that it was critical to fully understand these themes in order to properly implement the policies outlined in the 7 key issue areas. And what we heard was that to move forward, each theme must be acknowledged and addressed at every turn to ensure all policy recommendations are locally and culturally relevant. Back over to Erin.
Great, thanks, Matt. So the launch of the framework is really a call to action for all island community champions. As you've seen, as we laid out, the National Policy Framework lays out an extensive list of policies that, if implemented, would help US islands become more climate resilient. It'll take time and they won't happen all at once, but the framework is to be used as a tool and an opportunity to educate policymakers on exactly what islands need and to advocate for those policies and start making progress. But in order for progress to be made, advocates like all of you need to get the word out, to share your individual stories, your community stories, and the challenges you face in your own island communities when it comes to these 7 key issue areas, and to share the framework with decision makers to help them become island champions as well.
So again, special thanks to all the steering committee members who helped make this framework possible, including the policy subcommittee. We couldn't have done this without your help. So as we are wrapping up, if you go onto the climatestrong-islandsnetwork.com, the full national policy framework can be found on the website. So take a look there. We do have time for questions. So if you do have some, we encourage you all to attend and stay on between 7 and 7:30 so we can begin to kind of dive into the framework. Let us know if you have any additional thoughts, because we would be curious to hear. So getting some questions coming in. Let me see. So one question, are there any examples of innovative community-driven solutions for islands? And there certainly are. Our steering committee members were full of examples. They really wanted to shine a light onto their communities and the fantastic progress that is being made in their home islands and home communities. Waste management, Erin, Matt, and I kind of joke, it has become one of our favorite issue areas, and our very own Austin from the University of Guam has been really excited about the makerspace and really striving for the circular economy approach. So transforming solid waste back into reusable products. And I think that's one of the best examples that we have of island innovation and using trash to transform into another product and reuse it. So I know GLISPA posts different bright spots where they highlight these different innovative solutions within island communities. So I'm sure we can drop some of those links in the chat and make sure that you all are aware. But I think moving forward, this network is really excited about sharing innovation stories from island communities. Matt, Aaron, any other ones stick out in your mind?
Yeah, Nora, this is Matt, I would add, you know, there are dozens and dozens and dozens of great examples of island community innovation. But they sometimes or oftentimes aren't elevated in the process. And I think that's kind of the point. And it's a point we heard over and over again. And it's a point we tried to emphasize in the framework, that elevating island innovation and ingenuity and including letting island voices lead the process in how to repair for natural disasters, for example, for their own island community is pretty critical, but doesn't seem to happen nearly as often as you would think, or certainly we need. So I think all of us collectively together as a larger community, I think it falls upon us to listen to the local knowledge and the local voices that have been here for generations, elevate those voices and let them lead in figuring out some of these issues. And that's what we tried to do with this framework. This is an island-driven framework. We just took notes and wrote it all down, really. And so I think that's the point, right? There are dozens and dozens of island solutions out there. We just need to listen and elevate them and put them in the forefront.
All right, getting some more questions in from the chat. So thanks so much for sending them in. Let's see. So one question is for folks that live in US territories, and perhaps we can kind of dive deeper into this question as we move on to the 7 to 7:30 portion. But the question is, what are the most difficult barriers to providing input and being heard in the process?
So this is Matt again. I would, one of the things that struck me is that oftentimes the federal government, the US federal government, they have pretty strict processes and protocols that agencies have to follow. And those processes and protocols don't leave room for those local voices. And so that right there is just a simple structural issue that is challenging to elevate kind of those the island themes, the island voices in a federal process. So if an agency is working to, you know, quote, help an island community, they're often restricted by a certain protocol, standard, guidebook of sorts. And so that's another thing that we try to address in the framework here is those federal processes, agency processes and protocols should not only allow for the local voices, but actually purposefully elevate them. The federal agencies should follow the lead of the local knowledge, not the other way around, and follow the lead of the people that live on the islands itself, because they know their island, they know their community, they know what works, they know what doesn't. So I think that's one example of one of the barriers that is challenging to overcome for island community members when a federal agency intends to help, but just is restricted by various things, structural things that prevent those voices from being elevated.
Thanks, Matt. Again, I think we can certainly dive deeper into 7 and 7:30, but we have another question in the chat, and it's about the framework So how will this document now be utilized? And what is the expectation for an audience to read this? Jason, was that something that you could chime in with?
Sure, yes, thank you so much for that question. Great question, and something that we thought a lot about as we were creating it. I think we're looking from this group two things in particular. One is implementation and the other is improvement. So on the improvement front, when the network was formed, we looked around and said, is there a cohesive policy landscape survey of all US islands? What is the baseline that we're all operating from? And it was very hard to find that information. And so a lot of this is sort of creating that baseline to which we can grow from. And we know that this document isn't set in stone. And so what High Street did was really a monumental task to undertake something that we felt didn't really exist so that we can all improve over time. And, you know, Kaleem, with your work that you're doing, I think you're a great person to help us figure out if there's pieces that are missing or could be refined over time. So we're looking for you to take this back to your own networks and your own organizations and come back to us with feedback and make sure that we can improve it. On implementation, as Nora, Aaron, and Matt mentioned, there's real specific policy recommendations, things that Congress and federal agencies could do right now that would tangibly improve the lives of island communities. But they're not necessarily hearing from people in island communities when these pieces of legislation are being passed. So this framework is both to set on the record a set of recommendations to improve policy, to improve the appropriations process on where the resources are actually getting allocated. But also we hope you'll take maybe a piece of this and say, you know, transportation applies to my work. How can I use this network to go and testify in front of Congress? Because this is how it relates to my work, or a marine economy, or disaster preparedness. So it doesn't have to be the whole thing. There could be one of the 7 areas that it relates to your work. How can the network support you in increasing stakeholder engagement so decision makers and policymakers are hearing directly from you, your needs and your solutions? So I think those are our expectations. Did that answer your question? The other thing I'll mention, I know Liz mentioned this, there's 3 subcommittees. So there's the Climate Strong Islands Network Steering Committee, and there's 3 subcommittees. One is on development, trying to raise more money for this network and for our partners. Another is community outreach, making sure that we're expanding the network. And then the third is the policy subcommittee. And we hope, as all of you digest this, that you'll engage with the policy subcommittee and help provide your feedback.
Yeah.
Nora, do we have any more questions?
I think there are a few. So there's one question about invasive species and biodiversity, and if that's specifically mentioned in the document in terms of biosecurity.
I don't know that invasive species are directly addressed in the framework. It's a little bit broader than that. I think in kind of the marine economy and watershed planning areas, it might kind of speak broadly to invasive species, but certainly engaging with the agencies that would deal with that, I think, is an important aspect, I think, and certainly one that a particular island community could take up for sure, and use this framework as a way to facilitate that conversation, I think.
Absolutely. So another question we had was about Island Voices again, and what you were saying, Matt, that that whole process really does close off Island Voices. So until that changes, the power balance is unmanageable. So how can Island Voices be strengthened, and how can we use this national policy framework to get Island Voices heard?
So I would just reiterate what Jason just said. Read the document, use the document as a tool, and start engaging decision makers in conversations and that drive towards solutions, and use this framework to start that process and help guide that process if you all see it as useful, and start engaging in the process to change the process. I would just underscore exactly what Jason just encouraged everyone to do.
And I'll just note too that is exactly why so many of the policy recommendations include a specific mention of having Island Voices at the table for these decisions, and within working groups and collaborative efforts, and agency meetings and other kind of policy groups. You know, that recognition that Island Voices aren't heard enough now, and including in the policy recommendations specific policy, specific mention of including policy, or including Island Voices at those tables. And so that's sort of like that was a discussion for every key issue area, was to ensure those voices are heard.
So one other question we had that I think we've kind of touched on a little bit, but will we receive assistance with the policy amendments and/or development? So I think as we move forward, we have these policy recommendations that we are going to use as a jumping off point. But I think the intention of this group and the policy subcommittee is to keep working with members of the network like yourselves, you know, to let us know what we missed and what else we need to have included. So even from the chat, it seems like we have some other great examples and great ideas. So like Liz said, we want to hear from you. You all are a part of this network, and you help make us stronger. We definitely spoke to a number of different island communities, but we haven't heard from all of you. So we'd love to stay in touch through Liz and the policy subcommittee to let us know what else we can keep working on for you all and on your behalf. So there's one other question. Are there any agencies like NOAA, NASA, other folks in academia who have developed sea level rising or other climate related data looking 10 to 20 years out for infrastructure and agricultural planning purposes? I know the thing that comes to mind to me is the NOAA sea level rise viewer and calculator, where you can kind of play around and see where sea level rise, where the water will be in I think 5-10 years, but I'm not quite certain, to my knowledge, if there's anything specifically tackling infrastructure or agricultural planning, but I'm sure there could be.
Two resources mentioned in the chat here, Nora: NOAA's Center for Operational Oceanographic Products and University of Hawaii's Sea Level Center are two excellent resources for ocean climate services and planning. So maybe check those out.
Fantastic. So, Kate just asked, how are the freely associated states captured in this?
Well, Kate, I think as we found through this process, I can only presume that the issue areas that we identify in the framework are the same issue areas that faced in the freely associated states. And so this isn't just a framework. I mean, it's a framework specific to the US and really how the US federal government can better help islands become more climate resilient. But I also think it, perhaps, I hope, it provides some ideas and gets wheels turning that could help all islands, frankly, across the world, not just the US. I don't know, Jason, if you wanted to chime in here, or anyone really on the team, but hopefully, yeah.
I think the idea is that it's no island left behind approach. And so I actually think this is a really good point. If you feel that the framework excludes you or does not adequately include you, we want to know that. We're doing our best to make sure that it applies to every jurisdiction that the United States sees fit to give island communities. And we know there's many different ones that have different meanings. If you feel like you are not adequately represented or that this can't be applied to you, that is definitely something we would want to know, because the intent is that it can be applied across. And then I think one of the strongest things we're trying to leverage of the network is having regional coalitions. So the network is all US islands, but how can certain islands who maybe have congressional representation and are in the same geographical area as an island community that doesn't, how do you leverage a coalition, share resources, and advocate collectively so that those resources are going to that region at large? So I think there's 2 points to that.
All right. It looks like we're wrapping up here. So reminder again to stick around from 7 to 7:30 to continue the conversation. But I'm going to pass it back over to Liz to wrap this portion up and to move us along. Thank you for your questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nora. And Aaron and Matt, terrific presentation. And I can always tell that when we have the slow roll of questions coming in, and now it's a little bit like a tsunami. So excited to have a bit of discussion after we finish this formal portion. But again, as mentioned, and I think Mickey Eptison put in our chat, our communications lead, please do visit our website at climatestrongislands.org. You will see a pop-up box that will take you right to the national framework when you go to the homepage. We also have a policy page where you'll see that framework as well as the 7 key issue areas, and you can dive into the information that way. I will say too, I will pop into the chat right now my email address, and feel free if there is anything that you have questions about, you want to facilitate further discussion with myself, with Jason, Kate, any of our steering committee members, the team at High Street. I'm happy to set that up and discuss with you. So we'll leave it at that for now, but I am very excited to turn it back over to Kyle, who is going to introduce someone who's very special to us to close us out here.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Liz. And as you mentioned, the chat box was just blown up with a bunch of great activity. We do want to make a shout out to everybody who had questions. And like we've mentioned, like Liz mentioned as well, if you have more questions, you can kick back with us and join us for an informal discussion, of course, following this guy's remarks. It's going to come on real soon. Before we get to him, though, we do want to recognize and say hapde and hello and all of our other great greetings to everybody joining us on the call in the gathering today. We've got representatives and fam and friends from the Solomon Islands. The U.S. Virgin Islands are in the house, as is New Zealand. Big shout outs to Alessandra from South Carolina. Beautiful, beautiful. We've got Quentin from Australia, Norma from Tonga. We've got Cabri from Trinidad and Tobago, and we have got Paul from Vanuatu chiming in as well. And of course, big shout out to Paula from Grenada joining us too. As we mentioned, the connections, they're so strong, right? And as we've talked about, people are coming together to try to do their part to make everything happen for future generations. Before we disperse this gathering, we've got somebody who's been doing a lot of work here on our home island here on Guam, and he's here for closing remarks along with next steps. Please welcome the co-chair of the Climate Strong Islands Network Steering Committee, Dr. Austin Shelton.
How's today, everybody? On behalf of my steering committee co-chair, Brenda Torres from Puerto Rico, and the entire steering committee made up of islanders from around the United States, we would like to thank you for joining us for the 6th Climate Strong Islands Network gathering. Early last year, I shared with you the belief that islands are rising. Islands have been uniting in common purpose through networks like the Climate Strong Islands Network and the Local 2030 Islands Network. And our common purpose is to achieve a sustainable future together. The good news that I share with you today is that islands are still rising. We are moving ahead in this 3rd year of the Decade of Action to our destination of a sustainable, equitable, and prosperous future. Here in Guam this year, our team at the University of Guam Center for Island Sustainability is promoting the theme, Harnessing Wind in Our Sails to Sustainable 2030. Despite the global pandemic physically separating us, we have not been isolated. We have strengthened our bonds through these networks. And now we are building on our momentum of the past few years and sailing ahead. I believe that this 6th Climate Strong Islands Network gathering has been particularly meaningful. We now have a direction forward. Thanks to the work of our facilitation team and the High Street Strategies team, we are now united in this policy framework with important input from so many of you on the call today, and there's still room for you to reach out. After reading that document, please reach out to Liz. I think she put her email in the chat. Let's continue to connect and discuss these topics to make sure that we're working together, united in this framework, so that we can move the sustainable future of our islands forward together on these topics of clean energy, watershed planning, food security, disaster preparedness, marine economy, waste management, and transportation. So thank you all so much for being here today. And please stick with us and encourage your island friends to join in this Climate Strong movement. And just a quick shout out for those of you who have been enjoying our virtual events that we've been doing together with GLISPA and the Climate Strong Islands Network and the Ocean Foundation. We'd really love the chance to host you here in Guam if you have some time in just a couple of weeks, April 5th through the 9th. We're going back to in-person events, and they're going to be even more exciting than all the Zoom parties that we've been having with you. So please take a look at, in the chat, we'll put in a link to our 13th University of Guam Conference on Island Sustainability. And we will have keynote speakers, different breakout sessions. We'd love to gather together with you. And if you can't make it all the way out to Guam, we're going to have a fantastic hybrid option that you can also sign up for. So please don't forget to check out the 13th University of Guam Conference on Island Sustainability, April 5th through the 9th, 2022. Okay, and so thank you very much again for joining us at this biannual gathering of our Climate Strong Islands Network. Please stick around if you have a little extra time. We're going to now move into an informal breakout session together to answer some more questions or just to catch up on things. So thank you very much. And Suzuis Maasi here from us in Guam.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Shelton. Moving on now into the informal breakout session, as we mentioned earlier. This is the time if you have any other questions based on the presentation today or anything that was brought up during today's gathering, open floor. Feel free to chime in with your hand raised, or you can put it in the chat box if that's more comfortable for you. I know that we've had a lot of information to kind of digest, and I personally feel very motivated. So if you'd like to chime in and then get some further clarification on any of the subjects or topics that were brought up today, now's your time to do it. All right, warmest mahalo. Thank you so much for that, Jen. We appreciate it. Looks a lot like dinner time, I think, for a lot of people, huh, Liz?
I think that's true. we're reaching people at two different eating hours. That is true, especially on the Pacific Rim and then here in the East. It looks like Kaleem has his hand up. We've got Nikema and Kate. So let's do this. If you don't mind, I'm going to facilitate in lieu of Austin here, and we'll just go kind of in the order that I mentioned. So Kaleem, why don't you go ahead and unmute and ask your question or give your comment.
Sure. Thanks very much to the team. Glad to be here on this, and congratulations on the document. So following sort of from my question about who's the audience for this and document, and what's the use of the document, and some of the comments that the policy team made about using it as a tool. I sort of asked that question because of a couple early comments that I made to Jason and so on, that I'll sort of ask again here, or perhaps just, ask about, right? So one is the document meant to be for the sort of the policymaker that does not understand, or this is a first interface with island communities? And if that's so, one of the things I immediately noticed in the document, it is clearly communicated, but in that clear communication, there's not a lot of statistics in here, or data, or tables, or percentages, or dollars, or anything like that. So that would support the excellent points that are being made. And I think that when I talk about data-driven policy and empirically founded policy, and even the science policy interface. When we talk about that, what we mean is we want it driven by some numbers, right? And I think that as a tool, this would be very helpful for someone of us in the network. When we approach policy folks or decision-making folks who perhaps do not know much about what we're talking about with respect to islands, it's always good for us to be able to bolster our points and our discussion with that kind of empirical information. So while I feel like the document is great in its clarity and its organization and function and hitting the right notes, I wonder if there's more support that you guys can provide in terms of sort of bolstering the empirical piece of it. So that's sort of my point. And just allied to that is this idea sort of, so this is largely, as I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, the document is designed based on stakeholder consultations. But again, I still feel that there should be, even in the back pocket, so to speak, references to authoritative reports and studies that will help us in the network to justify and discuss this in more, in stronger ways, more robust ways with those policy decision makers that we want to discuss it with. And this, I think, should be added somewhere, as I said, maybe back pocket, but the document doesn't have any references to authoritative reports and studies. In the session we just had, folks were, for example, asking about sea level rise documents. And from that discussion, we're not exactly sure where that lies, but in this document, we're talking about climate action and climate resilience and adaptation and so on. So it would be very nice if we have that kind of material ready to support the document. I have a couple more comments, but I don't want to take up more time.
Yeah, Kaleem, I appreciate your points. And I do, just so that we can give anybody on our team that would like to respond some time, I'm going to ask, maybe we just address this one and then we move on to the next. And then if we have time at the end, we can come back around. So Nora, Matt, Aaron, Jason, I mean, I can share, I think Kaleem, your point is well taken. And I think maybe Jason, you can, you know, fill in the detail on this, but I do think, you know, as the team stated, this is really kind of the first wave of information that we're putting out. And so in terms of supporting documentation, you know, kind of further research, almost like a, you know, an index that includes further studies, some of the resources mentioned tonight. I mean, I think those are definitely all things that we can continue to add to the document and make accessible in different ways. Also, Nora, Aaron, Matt, it might be interesting to talk about some of the other tools that you've been developing that kind of go to that snack, bite, or I'm sorry, bite, snack, meal communications where, you know, depending on the audience, yes, this is the national policy framework document, but we are and will continue to have new tools that will be communications pieces that address specific interests of the organizations or individuals that any of our CSIN members are meeting with. So I'll leave it at that, but let the rest of the team address some of those points.
So Kaleem, Matt Mullen here. I just wanted to say, I appreciate the comment. You're totally right. I think more resources and specific data, graphs, other visuals, leave behinds, or what we refer to them in DC, are critical for this. We need to gather all the information we need to make the persuasive argument. The challenge that we faced last year and even the beginning of this year when we were having all of those conversations was that all the islands that we were talking with and all the islands that are involved in the network and the other islands around are all different. And so we didn't want to be too prescriptive in our policy recommendations and even supporting documents that might be directly applicable for one island, but not necessarily the other. For example, if you look at the clean energy policy recommendations, one of them is to reevaluate trade restrictions, custom procedures, and import taxes that create barriers to the entrance of supplies and equipment necessary for clean energy transition, right? Well, those trade restrictions and custom procedures and import taxes are going to be very different for Vinalhaven Island, which is part of the state of Maine, versus the state itself of Hawaii versus Puerto Rico, right? And so it was challenging to come up with the right balance, to be quite honest, in drafting this framework that applied to all islands, empowered or hopefully empowered all islands to take action and gave them the tool to start taking that action. But like I said in the beginning, I think your point is really well taken. I think additional data, additional resources, additional tools will certainly be necessary as members of the island network proceed forward in becoming more climate resilient.
Thanks a lot, Matt. And I'm not saying, you know, it's got to be chock full of stuff. I think there's some points that are made in here that are important and can be accentuated by some data points, right? I mean, and I take your point, and I totally agree that there's a lot of heterogeneity amongst the islands that we're looking at, right? But some things apply across the board as well. So one example I was reading the energy section can simply be that, you know, on average, U.S. island territories have, you know, 3 to 4 times as higher per kilowatt hours for electricity than mainland United States. And even something like that will help someone in the network to make that point, you see? So there may be opportunities for those kinds of things.
Yeah, great point. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to keep rolling with questions. So Nikema, if you'd like to share your question or comment.
Hi, good night. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, first off, let me just apologize for not being able to put on my camera. The internet here at my location is not very well. It's not that strong. So if I put on the camera, you won't hear me. First off, I would like to say that the presentation was very, very well, very informative. And I commend you for taking this initiative. St. Martin is also now taking the initiative to write or develop our national policy / roadmap for energy, sustainable energy methods. And my main question actually, because when I read the topic for tonight's discussion, which is not the topic, but Climate Strong Islands Network, I initially thought that it referred to all islands. But during the discussion, I am hearing that it's more leaning towards US islands. So I'm wondering if other islands within the Caribbean can also form part of this island network.
Liz, do you mind if I jump in and take that one? Thank you so much for that. Yes, all islands are welcome to join the network. We would love to have you be a part of the network. Tonight was a special briefing on policy, and that is first, we're doing this on the US, federal perspective. And so the policy recommendations, if adopted, would benefit islands that fall under US jurisdiction. However, that's just the policy lens that we are working with on the network. The other two tenets of the network are to drive more resources to island communities, and those could be US or non-US. And then the third is to be a functional network that shares lessons learned and resources. And this is where GLISPA, as our co-host, is really critical in helping move us forward and tapping us into the global island space. The Climate Strong Islands Network is also a member of the Local 2030 Islands Network, which focuses on the international space. So we want to be clear that the deliverables we're trying to drive on the policy work are federal, though we hope they can be applied internationally. But the other resources that the network has to offer are for all US islands. And so we would definitely welcome and encourage your participation.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jason. Very well put. And I know we have some other islanders who are calling in from elsewhere in the world, and please do take that message to heart. We would love for you to be part of our network. And again, happy to speak with you more about some of our other initiatives that are ongoing that were not part of our presentation tonight, but happy to share more. Kate Morrison, if you'd like to share.
Thank you. And I'm not from an island community, so if there's others in line that would like to ask a question from that perspective, I'm happy to wait my turn.
Okay. Thank you for that. I think both John and Jorge are calling in from islands, or
Great.
Tuning in from islands. So yeah, if you're okay, we'll go forward with John.
Oh, hi. Now, I'm actually from New Zealand, and I don't want to hop in front here. However, very, very quick comment. I want to applaud what you're trying to do. Matt made the point early that the federal processes are very difficult for island states. I want to reinforce that, and I want to encourage your team to keep all of your material simple in order that the island nations can interact with that. It is the imbalance of the power is enormous. I'm working with the Marshall Islands. I have previously worked with Solomon Islands, and the idea of resilient islands is fabulous, but it's got to be done in their terms. Otherwise, they don't engage in the dialogue. So let me just finish with that keep the policy expression simple, and somehow there's a need to enable the engagement of the small islands. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, John. All right, let's go over to Jorge.
Thank you. First, I wanted to say that I support what Khalid said. I agree completely with him. The need to have data, numbers, because I think this group of policy guidelines that we have discussed are basically is a very good tool to get to the table and show and convince the people that at that table that solutions for islands are not the same conceptually or operationally as solutions for the continents. So if you have a good guidelines for policies and you have data to support it, I think it would be an important tool to sit at the table, because if not, well, it's the same thing that we have been doing for so much time. It doesn't work. That's my comment.
Thank you, Jorge. Point well taken. I guess for both John and Jorge's comments, well, Jason, you popped in the chat that our resources will always be free and open for anyone who would like to review them, use them. But I think especially to Jorge's point, Jason, Matt, Aaron, Nora, any comments that you want to share?
Well, just one thing on John's, this is actually a plea for help to this group. So we are, our documents, the policy framework, our declaration, our founding documents are in English and Spanish, but we know that that is obviously woefully inadequate on all of the different languages that island communities speak. And so this is a place that we actually need some help in terms of what other languages we need to prioritize translating the documents and making them accessible. And then other things we're missing about accessibility that we could just do that would make them more accessible. So we welcome that feedback as well. Matt, Nora, Aaron, do you want to address Jorge's point?
Well, I would just say it's another point really well taken. Hear you loud and clear, Jorge. Appreciate the comment for sure. Thank you.
Terrific. Yeah, and to Jason's point, while we do not have the Spanish language version up today, we will have it up by early next week. So if that is a resource that you want to take advantage of, do look for it in the next week up on the website, and it will be adjacent to where the English language version is. Kate, do you want to go ahead?
Great, thank you. So if I could share my question embedded in a comment, I know facilitators' worst nightmare. So Jason Donofrio, who you all know so well, works both with me and for me at the Ocean Foundation, and Elizabeth and Matt, I've heard so much about you, so thank you so much for your work. So prior to my current role, for the past 20 years or so, I've been to lots of Fisheries Management Council meetings, helped run listening sessions and run public comment sessions for marine spatial planning at both the US state and regional level. And I've also been a staffer in a state legislature where the interest group that shows up with the most purple shirts or the thickest stack of postcards sort of turns the votes. And so in all of those processes, I've seen people try to influence decisions that have largely already been made, or where public comment is almost, unfortunately, a box checking exercise under the Administrative Procedures Act or whatever the different regulating instrument is in play. And so to me, at the end of the day, among many things, we really need to get representatives from the US islands on the FACAs, on the federal advisory committees, the official bodies that are supposed to represent stakeholders above and beyond that 90-day public comment period. And so I don't know what structures exist across the breadth of issues in the policy framework that you've all put forward, energy and what have you. And we know that these processes are inherently political and multi-year in themselves. And so I just wanted to relay that as, to me, that seems like a more specific goal that we might be able to achieve if there's a way to influence that process. That being said, it's one of a number of things, it's sort of the menu, but just wanted to offer from my perspective that I would like to see if we can do more in that area.
Kate, this is an awesome point, and I think it blends well into kind of where we're at tonight and then where we're headed this year. And I know already, as part and parcel of getting the final pieces of this version of the National Policy Framework together, Nora, Erin and Matt have been thinking about, okay, yeah, what's action tomorrow? What's action next week and further on? I'll let them address that. And especially in regard to, you know, the opportunity that you pointed out.
Kate, appreciate the comment. You are spot on. I think that is one example of the general concept that we're trying to promote here, is that island and island members, island community members need to get more involved, but also be more involved by the federal government, whether it's the executive branch or the legislative branch. One of the ideas that we heard and we had together collectively was to embed various island champions in agencies. And there were a variety of different ways you can do that. But I think that's kind of the point you were making, right? That islands need to be better represented from within the federal government, not necessarily providing comment from the outside. It's better to embed island community members within the process so islands can be better represented. So yeah, I was going to say one other thing, but I lost it, but appreciate the comment. It's a great one. And I hope it's something that we can represent, we did represent in the framework, but also represent moving forward. The next step is, I think what we see the next step is a pretty hefty education campaign, because a lot of policymakers in DC, frankly, don't understand islands and the unique nature of islands. That came across loud and clear when we started this project, throughout the project, and still. Even talking with folks on the Hill or in various agencies, they just don't get it. And they don't get it because they've never lived on an island. I had the fortunate benefit of living on an island for simply 1 year. And so I have at least 1 year's personal experience of living on an island and how that is different. And so bringing that realization to the decision makers, I think, is a really important next step. And I think Liz speaks to your question about what are the next steps. We just simply want to socialize the issues and socialize these solutions and start to create some momentum for change in Washington, DC. And hopefully we'll eventually get to your point, right, where we have island members integrated throughout the federal government and well represented.
I will maybe pose too, because we have a couple of CSIN steering committee members still with us here. You know, Austin, Suzanne, I don't know if Celeste is still on, Lirio. You know, if there is anything that you wanted to share to that effect in terms of opportunities that are ongoing for you, or that, you know, have highlighted to us. Because I will say, for instance, someone who's not on the call, Brenda Torres, our co-chair coming in from Estuario in Puerto Rico, for instance, is sitting on a national advisory panel for environmental justice with EPA right now. And so, you know, it's been interesting just working with her in the last couple of months and thinking about this framework and how and what she has been sharing with that advisory group. And then too, you know, how we've been thinking going forward about, okay, what are critical points where information can be shared, and who from that group and other groups adjacent can be brought into the conversation. So yeah, Kate, definitely much more work ahead. And that's why we're really thrilled that Nora, Matt, and Erin have, you know, have wanted to continue work with us and to go forward. And frankly, that all of you on this call, I mean, the fact that you stayed after, and I know you all have a lot of things going on in your lives right now, there's a lot happening in the world, but that you're taking time to help us further refine this information, and most importantly, to activate it, to figure out, you know, what strategies we need to use to make sure that it's not just a report on a shelf, but that it's a living document that we're constantly putting into the hands of people who need to see it, understand it, and, you know, help us move change forward. Okay. Sorry, and I kind of opened the door for Suzanne, Austin, Lirio. Suzanne, I saw you pop into the video there. Is there anything that you wanted to mention?
I would just say briefly, hello everyone, my name is Suzanne McDonald. I'm the Chief Community Development Officer at an organization called the Island Institute. We're based off the coast of Maine. Most folks maybe don't know we have thousands of small islands within 20, 25 miles off the coast of Maine, some of which have year-round communities that my organization is focused on trying to support their needs to continue to remain viable, thriving communities. And we really feel like building connections with other islands throughout our region and country has actually been a really critical way for us to identify what's working in other places, bring solutions here so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And I would say on the policy side, one of the things that we're really excited about is just we organizationally and with our communities here in Maine have had some good luck of building partnerships with island communities in other parts of the United States and building in some ways some pretty exciting and powerful alliances within our respective congressional delegations. And so I think one of the things that's interesting here is that all of us ideally have some degree of representation. I know that varies widely based off of what we heard earlier from Matt, but you know, I think the more we can connect the dots to shine a light on when federal program and program design and policies fall short of meeting the needs of islands across the United States, we're stronger when we have a shared voice together and shining a light on that. And I think when we can build sort of political will across the aisles and across the halls of Congress, I think has been something we've seen had some good luck on, particularly related to clean energy and seeing some changes on how the Department of Energy is providing resources to island communities. And I think we're really excited to connect the dots with you all here and have a stronger voice for islands on a number of other different fronts. So I would just say that's the piece we're most excited about, is not just our own individual stories and needs, but connecting the dots and building sort of a more robust response for all islands in the US moving forward.
Great, thank you for sharing that, Suzanne. And Jen, I'm so sorry that I didn't recognize you as well. I think you were on my page too here. So again, thank you to all our steering committee members who participated in putting this report together and are going to continue the work. I do see two more hands. Kate, if you'd like to go ahead.
Yeah, in fact, it's hard to follow Suzanne. She has said that so well. But I'm also going to say that this is very much about connecting the dots. As someone that's been working in the island space for like a long time, you know, when we started working at international islands, there was also the same issue that we're seeing here of disconnection and lots of champions doing kind of their individual things. And a lot of effort was put into trying to bring that together. And you see it in a number of different initiatives at the international level. To me, it's really exciting because I think the way that we're going to kind of address all of these issues facing us, including climate change, and also the ability of people to keep living good lives on their islands, is if we start helping people listen and hear what people's experiences are. And I think there's a lot of benefit for the international island community if the islands of the United States are enabling their government to see what it means, what special considerations, what are the needs of islands. And I think that, you know, in a couple of years, we're going to see some real progress in the sets of new relationships and lots of more knowledge of kind of those critical needs and what it looks like to be implemented. In our work, we always like to see islanders as solution providers. And so I think that that's what we'll start to see as well. This idea of bright spots, the idea of where islands can plug in, both US islands with the rest of the world and vice versa. And so I think I just find this, you know, it's a natural progression, and it's bringing together those early movers who will help bring everyone else along. So that's all I want to say.
Thank you so much, Kate. I will say, Lirio, if you want to close us out, I think we're getting to the end of our question and comment period. Although I should ask is, if you want, raise your hand. This is kind of the last gasp of if you would like to pose a question to the group. And Lirio, go ahead. Oh, and I think you are on mute. Let's see if we can.
Yes, you're right.
Great.
Sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
I just want to say, well, I can't follow Kate because I can't add to anything to what she said because I was thinking along the same line. And I am very happy that we had the participation from all over. And I believe that even our policy document, although it's created for the US islands needs, I think it will also be resonant with other islands under other governments or island states, because we all face very similar challenges. Maybe they are focused in a different way through the legal framework, but they are very similar challenges. Since everyone's, it's late, I would just like to thank everyone for everyone on the team who worked to make this happen tonight, and everyone in the audience who made this such a success, and especially those people who've stayed until the end. I thank you all because it's only through a group effort that this is going to happen. Thank you. Good night. It's night in my side of the world. It's day in Kate's.
Thank you so much, Lirio. That was a beautiful way to close us out. And I think with that, we are right at time. So thank you all. I will say in the chat, Mickey posted this just seconds ago or minutes ago. Please do follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. We are building up those social channels, especially to share this information about the National Policy Framework. So that is a quick and easy way to follow us during the day. But again, come to the website, reach out to myself, Jason, or really anyone in our team, anyone on the steering committee directly. We'd love to hear from you, and we really appreciate you joining us tonight. So with that, thank you all. Have a good day, have a good evening, and we'll look forward to see you soon.